Hello. How's it going, Monitorama? Woo! Woo! A little bit of energy. This is Angelo Licastro, and a while back, I mentored him.
This is Zach Musgrave, and he mentored me.
Crazy, right? So we have one goal in this talk, and that is to have you walk away with a toolkit to be a good mentor, or if you're already mentoring, to be an even better mentor. That's the hope, that's the dream. Let's do it. Nope.
So let's talk a little bit about who we are first.
Who are we?
Who are we? So we're a team of 12 people based in San Francisco, and here are some of the buzzwords that describe what we do. Observability, data engineering, experimentation, and analytics, just to name a few. But actually,
it's all about the people. These are the 12 or now 13 folks who make the spice flow. And people design systems, systems don't design people, right? If that ever changes, we're all in a lot of trouble. So, it's all about the people.
So let's begin.
All right.
Today we'll be talking about 4 main points. What's mandate growth and what should it mean for you? Mentoring engineers as a journey. Consulting as what sets our team apart from different metrics and observability teams. And how to be a good people person. So, a few of the things that we do, expanding on those buzzwords. The first 2 you're probably familiar with if you're in any sort of engineering team. You develop, test, deploy, and prototype alternatives to the systems that you have. The third one, if you're in any sort of DevOps sense, you do some on-call stuff, maybe to your chagrin. And the fourth one, consulting, is, again, the secret sauce that we think sets us apart from different monitoring and observability teams.
But this is a technical conference, so it's worth saying a little bit about the scale that we're working at. So we own the entirety of Yelp's time series data, which is about 25 million data points per minute ingested. We also own Splunk's business intelligence, log aggregation stuff, so that's about 30 terabytes a day ingested. We're also building out some really cool experimentation frameworks that are going to work across all our mobile apps and the front end and the back end, and we're using Rust and LLVM to cross-compile those. We're beginning a data lake, which is eventually going to be in the way many petabyte scale. But my favorite part is our users. So it's everyone from interns to executives, really wide swath of people, product managers, software engineers, folks in DevOps roles, you name it.
So our team didn't always used to have 12 people. So why did it grow, and why do teams grow in general? So we like to think of 2 types of growth, top-down, which is driven by execs and the organization in general, and bottom-up, which is driven up by individual engineers on the team. So bottom-up is a little bit more expected because it's within the team, but actually less common. So if the org or execs tell you that your team is getting more engineers, so what does that actually mean for you? And it means that your mandate's going to grow. So we think growth is kind of a nuanced word, and we'll be talking about it quite a bit. So we like to give you our interpretation. We like to think of, again, 2 types of growth. Inward, which is how you see yourself affecting progress, and outward, which is how you see yourself catalyzing others' progress. It could be a teammate or anyone else in your org. And you want to strike a balance between both, right? Speaking of balance, growth is really strong and powerful and sometimes only possible as a team. So as you move forward, leave no engineer behind.
Of course, when your team grows and the stuff you work on grows, there are a lot of advantages that come full circle. So for one thing, a lot of us here are really interested in the nitty-gritty and the technical details of the systems, and we've gotten to be exposed to so many more of those, like the optimizations we've had to do for our data lake Spark topology converters, and some of the crazy LLVM stuff that we've had to deal with for our Rust experimentation framework. These are really amazing projects that have been a lot of fun to work on, and we wouldn't have had that opportunity if our mandate hadn't expanded. And as you do this, obviously you're impacting the organization more and more because you're touching more parts. If you keep pushing on a certain problem and you say, oh, this is really important, people may not take notice right away, but eventually you do get pulled in that direction, at least in our experience. And that can be a really powerful way to increase your impact.
So, what about people? Your mandate's growing, It's really, really important to foster those new relationships with the new hires and interns more than ever, because you want to kind of sell them on why your team and what you're doing is important so they can jump in themselves. So of course, with the advantages, there are some challenges of mandate growth. As you're doing more things, as you're adopting more competencies, it's really tempting to stash that knowledge in one or two people and just forget about it. But you want to try to avoid that because it'll start creating knowledge silos, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But also, the last two bullet points, planning and trade-offs. Now that you have more people, you're probably going to have more meetings, so you have better project coordination, so you can help drive the real effort of your team, and that comes with trade-offs as well.
So I do want to talk a bit about the knowledge silos that Angelo kindly fed me into. As I said earlier, people create systems. Systems do not create people. So sharing knowledge about these systems across different people is essential if you ever want to improve on those systems. It turns out that it's very, very difficult to monitor systems that you yourself don't understand at all. You need at least some knowledge of them in order to understand what are the pain points and what are the critical metrics. So a big part of our training process when we start with a new member of the team is creating forcing functions to create this sharing of knowledge. And we start with that on day one.
So enough about growth. Let's talk a little bit about mentoring. We like to think of mentoring as a journey best described by these three steps: breadth, depth, and the recursive next steps.
All right. So in breadth, this is the beginning, and it's all about the building of the confidence. So we do this in a couple different ways. One of the things that we've had a lot of success with is weekly private meetings between the mentor and the mentee. I suppose I should define the mentor, and this is a senior or moderately senior member of the team who has been there, let's say, at least a year, often longer. And these meetings are intended to be completely candid. So there is no silly question. There is nothing that's particularly off limits, whether it's a question about people processes or stuff about the company. It's all open for discussion. And these should be scheduled, and these should be important and adhered to. So as far as deliverables, what we really are hoping for is to understand all systems at something of a high level, like a 50,000-foot view, and understanding one system at a deeper level in the first 2 to 4 weeks. But this leads to a question of, well, what order do you have your mentee look at these systems? Which one is going to build confidence the fastest for them? So let's imagine that you have 3 metrics pipelines, and they're all intended for different purposes and have different trade-offs. Let's say that each one has a client library, an aggregator, a relay, a data sync. So you could have your mentee make changes to all 3 client libraries in a row. But that doesn't really give them the confidence. It just treats the rest of the system as a black box. And so what we did when Angelo joined was we worked through the entire pipeline on one of those systems pretty early on. Mm-hmm. Did you feel like that helped?
I do. I think getting exposure to the full stack really gave me perspective on all the other pipelines and that pipeline itself.
Yeah, and it also turned him into a very early expert on that specific pipeline, which was really useful because he went on to do more stuff with it.
So Zach spoke a little bit about tickets. So it's important to remember that there is no sort of score that you have as an engineer, and it's not affected, it's not a direct function to the amount of tickets that you close. If you think you're going too slow churning through tickets, maybe even slow down a little bit more, because burnout is very real. Maybe one thing to help prevent burnout is set aside a day or two to just read some documentation, especially because of your new mandate growth. Don't even open up your terminal for that day, and it's completely fine. It might feel weird at first, but trust me, it'll help in the long run.
I absolutely agree. And reading all those docs takes you right into phase 2 of the mentorship journey. So obviously, you have to learn to swim before you can go in the deep end of the pool. But hopefully after these new hire tickets and building up a bit of confidence around one system, the mentee knows how to swim a bit. So let's talk about going in the deep end. So the depth phase, the way I see it, is it's a true individual contribution. It's something advanced and useful for one system, or maybe a couple related systems. And you may ask, like, well, what does the mentor do at this phase, since it's supposed to be an individual contribution? Well, it depends. So every mentee is different. Folks come in with different backgrounds, different levels of education, different industry histories, and so you want to tailor the mentor's role to help the mentee with the things that they're still working on. This always involves code review both ways, mentor to mentee and vice versa, knowledge of the architecture at the organization, and lots of context. I think those are the key points.
So after this breadth and depth, let's talk about the recursive next steps and what we can do for that.
All right. So formally, this is the end of the mentor-mentee relationship. Angelo canceled our weekly one-on-ones on me. I was so sad. I really enjoyed them.
I did too, but it's time
to move on.
Time to grow apart.
and it's a good thing, right? Because that's level up. That's +1, and it's something to really be excited about. And maybe we'll throw you on call. That happened not long after. So right around the time that the depth project is complete, these are the next steps, and where do you go from here? And the main thing is to convene what we call a retrospective.
So now that you've graduated from mentorship, maybe you should start teaching other people.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, but a little bit of humility is that you or the mentee is not an expert, and neither is the mentor, though. So I guess it's a win-win.
I don't actually know anything.
I don't know what I'm talking about up here either, so no worries. And if you're not labeled as a mentor, you don't actually have the mentor title, and you don't have an actual mentee, it's still important to teach other members of your team or org what you're doing, so there's no single point of failure, and you can kind of minimize that bust factor for your team.
Absolutely. So there's really only one reason to hold this magical retrospective, and that is actionable feedback for improvement. So to be more specific, you want to be able to point out specific instances of behavior or scenarios that are relevant, specific instances, and you also want to be able to provide feedback that is useful. And useful is key. It's not enough to say, oh, that didn't go well. It's like, that doesn't help. How did it not go well, and how can we make it better next time? This improves future behavior and gives a lot of guidance to move forward effectively. So there are about 10,000 different possible topics you could cover in such a meeting. Communication with stakeholders, like if we rolled out a project and we expect 3 or 4 teams to utilize it and they were like surprised when we rolled it out, how could we have done better keeping them in the loop? Maybe the style of code reviews. Occasionally interns will put out nothing for code review and then drop 5,000 lines on you. And I'm like, cool, I have a week to review this, that'll be great. Or any kind of divergence from like the initial plan. There's nothing wrong with diverging from the plan, but why did we diverge? Like, is there anything we can learn about creating a better initial plan next time?
Yeah, it's cool to talk about it.
Yeah.
So maybe after the retrospective, you're not feeling so hot. And it wouldn't be a mentorship talk if we didn't talk about imposter syndrome.
I agree.
It's important to remember that there's no such thing as a rock star or a 10x engineer, even if it seems like all these people on your team are really, really awesome. They are probably awesome, but they're not a 10x engineer.
They don't exist.
They don't exist.
That's my statement.
And if you're like me and you kind of have trouble gauging whether you're actually doing a good job, try looking outward to your team to see if they're acknowledging the work that you're doing. And if they do, acknowledge or accept it, because they're probably not lying to you. And similarly, other people are probably feeling maybe insecure about the work that they're doing. So it doesn't matter how long they've been there. It's important to give positive feedback or constructive, objective feedback, no matter what.
And it's important that it, like you said, it's important that it goes every which way, because even if you're the most tenured person on the team and the newest person on the team says, hey, I saw what you did yesterday and that was like really amazing in this way and that way, like that still feels really good and it's still really useful.
Mm-hmm. So what if I actually do make a mistake? What happens then?
Oh, you don't make mistakes, you're perfect.
So you might have forgotten this little story.
Oh, I remember this.
Of course. So I went to deploy a relatively stable system one day. It was a normal day. About 5 minutes into the deploy, users started popping up into the channel saying, can't log in, what's happening? So, do some investigation, jump on one of the boxes, and discover that the secrets file, along with a lot of other important things, aren't there. So, yeah, what did I do wrong? My mistake was that I used the fish shell.
Hipster.
And
Hipster alert.
And the deploy script had quite a few bashisms, so it just kind of clobbered lots of files. So I was really panicking. What do? I started reaching out to my team members sitting next to me, and they're like, just copy it back. We have 2 backups. Copied it back. Everything was hunky-dory, and then I didn't panic anymore. So mistakes are cool.
Mistakes are cool and part of life.
Yep. So how would we avoid those mistakes? We can start by deriving some new hire or intern project criteria.
All right. So the first project criterion is pretty simple, and that is that the project we're going to have them work on must be needed. So in other words, if you didn't join our team when you did, we would have done this anyway. We might have had to push it out to next quarter because staffing is always a problem. We might have split it up among multiple people instead of assigning it to one person and have them do it like a little bit at a time, but it would have been done anyway.
In addition to that, it also needs to be useful. So whether your team or one other team or multiple teams are going to use it, at least have one team use it, have someone use it. And if you have some sort of project planning like OKRs, make sure it's reflected there so both you and the people that are using it know that it's important to you and your team.
Yeah, and I've observed that OKRs can have a bit of a psychological effect. If you're working on something that you've been directed to do, but yet it's somehow like never made it into the quarterly planning, you're like, is this really important? Mm-hmm. So it's really important to try when you do your quarterly planning to include everybody. If they're working on something that's important, please include it. And finally, achievability. So I bet most of you, if not all of you, have at one point or another needed a new job or wanted a new job, and you're sitting in an interview, and somebody asks you a question, technical or otherwise. They say, implement traveling salesman in linear time. And you're like, I am not getting this job. And you just have that sinking feeling where you're like, oh, the rest of the panel doesn't matter, like this is clearly not my day. But the thing is that like that's not on you. Because any one of us, I can pose a question that you won't be able to answer. You can do the same to me. Like, what does that give you? It gives you nothing. We can all do this to one another, but it's pointless. If we're in an interview scenario or we're in an intern project scenario, we're here for success. We want to be successful. And so we have to ensure, as best we can, that the project is achievable with the time and the resources given. And finally, social network. So let's say that you have a new full-time engineer join your team, and they have decades more experience, they're world-renowned, and they're way senior to you, and you're their mentor. You still have one thing that you can give them that is incredibly useful, and that is your social network. You know people on other teams, you can make the introductions, have a cup of coffee, and talk to them, and now they have that connection that they can leverage themselves. For your first project, it was really close to our operations team. Mm-hmm. And I think like on day 1, I made those intros. Did it help?
I mean, I'm so yes, it did help, and I'm very candid with those people now. I mean, I just walk over their pod maybe bi-weekly to discuss, random things about our systems or the org in general. And I think when Zach made those connections, it really kind of helped that.
Yeah, we're hoping that it'll keep moving forward and increasing velocity.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about this consulting biz and what does it actually mean, and it sets us apart from other metrics and observability teams. But why do we consult in the first place?
That's a great question. So it turns out that monitoring is such a specialized field that there's this conference that's dedicated to it. I think it's called Monitorama, as I recall. And so there's a lot of nuance to monitoring and observability and all the words surrounding it. If you work in this space day to day, you understand this nuance in your systems and in open source projects. But for somebody who's like a back-end developer focused on the application stack and on features, they may not have this background. And this can be a stumbling block to them when they come to your team and they say, I want to measure some stuff. So even if your systems are flexible and resilient and ready-made, and we try to do that, it can still be really complicated to choose between them.
Mm-hmm. So did you know that there's a difference between reporting and monitoring?
Reporting and monitoring. Reporting, monitoring. No, those sound the same.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess with reporting, you have some nice OLAP or SQL queries, you run them, you get a report, and you can derive metrics from them. If you want more real-time metrics, if you want to actually observe the health of a system right now, you run those SQL queries more frequently, but sometimes that's contentious and doesn't work out so well for you. But you usually want to use something maybe like a timescale database or a time series database, which we recommend on our team. And knowing the difference or not knowing the difference between that is fine, as long as you choose the correct solution in the end game. And we're fine with teaching you that, because that's the whole point of our team, right? That's the whole point of consulting.
People coming in from feature teams are pretty familiar with running queries over like some of our data warehouses. And so they're like, oh, I need to monitor this every minute. Cool, I'll just run that query every minute. And that sometimes doesn't end well. And I'll tell you one more that's more about the trade-offs. So there was this one trade-off that was really important and actually made a difference. So a colleague from another team was building a circuit breaker. And what I mean by this is a system that will notice failures from like a certain HTTP endpoint on a certain service in a certain data center. It'll realize, oh, 60% of the requests are coming back as 500s. This is unhealthy, so let's mark it as unhealthy in a data store. And then if you have client libraries that respect that, they say, oh, this is unhealthy. I'm not even going to make the request until the system comes back and is healthy again. So think of it like exponential backoff, like TCP, but like with a central source of truth. Okay, so our colleague's first design basically just wrote everything to Zookeeper. And it made so many writes in the design that our Zookeeper experts said, oh, please don't do that. So he came to us, and we were really happy that he did. We said, well, maybe we can do something with our time series pipelines and create counters for the successes and failures of each circuit that you want to instrument. And he said, that sounds great. And I said, well, what's going to happen if if the time series go away and the storage engine just isn't responsive? He said, okay. So we walked through the failure scenarios, and we came up with a plan and how he could fail gracefully, and he went and did that. And later he came back when his implementation, like number one, basically worked like first try. And he said, you saved me and my team like months of debugging and re-architecting. And saving them that time and allowing them to go and do other things, that is why we consult.
So if you're consulting with other teams, you probably have to talk to them, and you probably want to communicate effectively. So a few tips. If you're asking questions, try to ask or try to pose what problem you're trying to solve rather than how you're trying to solve it. Occasionally on our team we'll get questions, and we just have to redirect them to another place, another team, and that's perfectly fine. We're okay with doing that. We just need to know. And kind of similarly, if you're helping people, try to steer people towards those insightful questions. I mean, they can then steer other people to ask insightful questions. And if they're not, it's not always their fault, right? I mean, maybe you didn't create enough documentation for them, for themselves to help themselves. So if that's the case, then you might want to consider why they're asking non-insightful questions.
Yeah, it's a great question. Why are the questions that we're getting not so good? So here's the best practice as far as I can distill it into one slide. And step one is listen. However much you are listening right now, you can probably listen more attentively, actively. And when someone comes to your team and asks for help, assume that you really don't know anything about their problem, because they are experts at some other part of your organization's deployment, and you're not. So listen some more, and eventually, so one thing that often happens is someone will come into our Slack channel and they will ask a very detailed implementation question. They'll say like, hey, I want to add this like 15th optional parameter to this one library, and I'm surprised that it's not there already, and like, what's up with that? And I'm like, that is oddly specific. So I wonder why they're asking that. And there's sometimes like they really do need that feature and we really do need to add it. But oftentimes it's more better to say, what are you really trying to achieve? What's your end goal? What are you trying to build? And then they say, oh, well, I'm trying to do this, that, and the other. And you say, oh, well, did you know we have this other system that is bespoke and like designed for that right off the bat, and you can just plug and go. And you propose that solution, they walk away happy, and you don't have people using the non-optimal system for the non-optimal purpose.
So we talked about a lot of things today, but if you were to only take away 3 things from our metrics or mentoring toolkit, it would be that we think of mentorship as a journey, best described by the 3 steps: breadth, depth, and the recursive next steps. People matter infinitely more than systems do until they start writing themselves, in which case we have bigger things to think about. And being a good people person is really, really important. So try to empathize with your users, your teammates, and help tear down those process and people silos and just bring people together.
Yeah, bring people together. Speaking of bringing people together, we have a rec open on this team, so if you want to hang out with me and Angelo and talk about monitoring and mentorship and time series, you should come and talk to us after the talk. Come and find us. Love to chat. You can find Yelp on all of the usual interwebs places. And that's all we got. Thanks for your time.